Business to business could be something as simple as a purchase order. You want to electronically send a purchase order to your supplier. It is accounts receivable. You want to send the invoices off and you keep track of it. Instead of having a paper copy and someone typing it in, you eliminate chances for errors. Accounts payables, again, generating payments from receivables. Again, all done electronically. You send off the information for the remittance. A good example is Walmart sends off the remittance electronically, and the check is done electronically to the bank. So the thousands of invoices they pay every day come in a file that you have to take into your system to apply against your receivables. Shipping and logistics would be, when you ship to, again, I'm going to use Walmart as an example. When you ship to a Walmart store, you have to send to them an electronic version of the bill of lading, which they will then take into the receiving system, so they know that it's coming. It's all done paperless. Business-to-business integration. In banking, it's bank transfers, electronic transfers, ACH, things of that nature. Account clearinghouse processes. When you go through the Federal Reserve Clearinghouse, you're doing a lot of it electronically these days. Very little checks are actually going through the clearinghouse. Investment activities. When you get something back from your financial institution into your banking portfolio, it's all done electronically. Right? Customer transaction reconciliation. How many of you use QuickBooks in here for your personal finances? Any of you? None of you? Because QuickBooks has this little feature. QuickBooks, or Quicken, they have this little feature in there called balancing or reconciling your checking account. And what you're doing is you're going out to your banking institution, as long as you've configured it, pulling in a record of all the transactions they have and reconciling it against your copy of your checkbook. That's how you're balancing your checkbook. That is actually an integration process, where you're integrating data from two different sources to solve a problem. Scientific and medical, weather station observations. If you've ever been out to weather.gov, they keep floodplain and river level statistics to know downstream what's going to be happening as a rain or a weather system hits a specific area. They're monitoring the flood. That's how they can give flood warning, flash flood warning information of that nature for just general safety of the public. That is actually data integration. They're collecting data from multiple points, putting it into a common system to analyze the process. Electrical grid demands, power companies. Duke Power looks at consumption to determine how to distribute power during certain times of the day and the week, etc. They're constantly monitoring all of this information, collecting the information, taking it in, again, from multiple sources in order to predict what they need to do. Cancer research is another example. I actually worked on a project where we consolidated data from a multiple source independent research groups. They wanted to commonize the data, or bring the data into a common factor to be able to determine, was all of the research looking in the same direction, or was something going astray? We actually had over 10,000 different research sources with thousands of information, or thousands of patient information for each of them that we had to consolidate in the process. CDC uses it actually for virus outbreaks. Their local health departments are putting data into the local health department database, and that's being transmitted to the CDC to determine just the average influenza cycle of the year. Again, that's all data integration, all handled by something that SSIS can deal with. Right? It's not just simple business, sending a file off and another file reading it. More, shipping and manifest for freight companies. When you have an LTL carrier, people send all of their information in. They have to combine it into a common bill of lading for that trailer. It's all done electronically. State education testing, we have No Child Left Behind. That actually goes into, again, data integration, because the local Board of Educations have to compile the information, send it up to the state, which then has to bring it into a uniform view, which then have to send it off to the federal government, which again has to bring it into a unified view. So there's two levels of integration there that are going on. Again, it is all part of data integration. traffic studies. You've all run across the little things on the road that make your tires go boom, boom. As you're going across it, they're counting traffic to determine how much flow is on a specific street. That is all being recorded into a database, and then that's all being consolidated into a regional database to know how does traffic flow in the region, so they can plan things such as interstates, widening roads, where to put stoplights, where to put stop signs. All of that is done through data integration, collecting the data so that you can analyze it. Election returns are another good example. It's all done at the local board of elections and transmitted up to the state level. Right? Some of these just sound simple, but that's actually, it is actually still all data integration. Driving records. Another example, your driving record is when you have it in the state of North Carolina and you are in the state DMV, insurance companies that you have on record are getting records of your, are getting copies of your driving record every month transmitted to them to make sure that you're still currently insured. Right? That's why it's always a hassle when you change insurance companies. Sometimes they don't catch up to you. It kind of misses you for a month or two. Census data is another good example. When every 10 years when we go around and we collect census data, that's all put into local databases and then all integrated into a common database. It's the same idea as a business that has multiple divisions, that each division has their own accounting system. The parent company still wants to know how is the corporation doing as a whole. So they're wanting to bring all of this data in combined into one. Censuses work the same way. And there's a lot more beyond that. Data mediums used, it's pretty much mostly electronic. You have relational databases of some nature. I'm not going to say just SQL Server because there are other sources, other types of relational databases. I mean, if you've worked in the banks, you're probably working on Teradata and Oracle as well. Flat file processes. Sometimes a business to business, it gets sent in an EDI flat file, which is a free-form flat file. And you have to put it through a parse routine, such as an SSIS or an ETL process, in order to get the data useful in your company's needs. Sensors. Dan's been very hot on the Internet of Things lately, and sensors are another source of data. Going back to the traffic pattern, or the traffic flow, that sensor is recording information. As cars travel by, it's recording the car or the vehicle, and it's recording the timestamp so that they can put that into a database to collect the data. There's a company out in Indian Trail called Johnson Inc. that they actually have sensors put into city and municipal water flow systems and storm systems to determine how well the storm systems work in collecting waste and, not waste, but rainwater runoff from storm systems to know where the floodplains are in their city. Human input can be anything from someone entering into a keyboard or scanning a document on a multifunctional scanner, just someone having to actually take some sort of physical process to enter the data. And any of these, with the exception of the human input, could be sources or destination. Yes?
So how do you connect technically to the sensors data?
To a sensor?
Yeah.
Sensors are, again, Dan's done some presentations on the Internet of Things where devices are now intelligent devices connected to the grid. In the case of the company out in Indian Trail that does the rainwater runoff, they actually have cell phone technology built into each and every one of their sensors with a geotracker or geotag on it to know exactly where it's at, that calls up every 20 minutes telling what the water levels are at that time. So there's a variety of different ways. The boxes that you run over on the side of the road, more and more of them, they're becoming connected to the grid through wireless technology, but originally all they did was did an individual counter with a timestamp as whenever pressure was hit on that tap, or on that item on there. Sensors can be anything that can recognize or accept some sort of activity.
No, that's okay, but my question is like, how do you connect it to like the source? What will be the source that you're trying to connect to the sensors in an SSIS package?
Again, it would be however the media is collected. If, again, going back to the one in Indian Trail, the rainwater, this phone system, the sensor measures the rainwater. It then turns around and every 20 minutes connects back into the server to upload the sensor information that it read.
Just into a relational database.
Yep. Yep.
It's through like a web service.
Mm-hmm. Right. Same thing now that some of the traffic pattern that they're identifying. Again, those boxes are now becoming more and more wireless. So it's periodically capturing the data and then pushing it up to the service or to the web host, to the database, and collecting and accumulating the information. Okay? Any other questions? Okay, the tools that we use, or tools that can be used. There's a variety of tools that are out there. SSIS is a Microsoft specific. You have Oracle BI as an example. Oracle BI is more designed for output than it is for integration, but it can be, I have seen it used for integration. Informatica is probably the biggest one among the banks that I've seen. And there's a whole, there's a host of them out there. So it's way too much to go into one slide, obviously. But those are the most popular that I've seen. If you have a specific one that you like, that's fine. I suggest that, what my history was when I was first introduced to the latest version of Informatica, I was told that it does things that SSIS didn't, and I found out the person that said that hadn't seen SSIS for about 6 years. So.
And it's way more costly.
And Informatica is a lot more costly, especially the training aspect of it. All right, history of SSIS, it evolved from DTS, all of you, and that's where a lot of people that think it is not as powerful as it is still think of SSIS as a DTS, which was pretty much a straight, field-to-field mapping process, very limited functionality. DTS limits make it best for simple mapping, again, field-to-field, but when you have to integrate more complex needs, you need an application approach, and that's what SSIS now offers you. The ability to go in and write modules and classes within the package to determine how certain data is going to be handled. Right. And that's why also I said that this is not something we can do in 1 hour. Because all right, SSIS does add the flexibility to customize the data as it's being loaded. Again, this is something that Informatica can do as well, but it allows application processing to it. One of the differences I do see between Informatica and SSIS, for those of you that are familiar with it, Informatica is limited strictly to SQL commands the last I saw. I don't know if the latest version has it. SSIS gives you the capabilities of including C#, Java, and C++ into the process.
Now, when you talk about you said the application
Mm-hmm.
thing, like with classes and things like that, is that a way of, are you talking about organizing the C# script components to it, or are you saying that you can separate your stuff out into classes? Like
You can break processes into classes and write an application that will work with the classes, yes. So, project I was on for the previous 2 years, that they are actually starting to do some of that functionality within SSIS, but they're still working on a 2008 version, so they're limited right now to C#. But they are actually writing classes for a common process that they can import into each of their processes, into each of their SSIS packages, that now mean that, all right, say a date conversion always has to happen and look this way. They can put it into the class that they can port between the different packages.
And so you could do something like something we've seen with like file archiving after we've completed a process.
Mm-hmm.
Like I would like to avoid anything repeated every time we do it.
Right, yep. And that is another good example that this company does. They have a step in their, in all of their SSIS packages that is a class that does what's called a file watch and file archive, where the file watch triggers the execution of the package. The file archive is when it's done, it moves it through into the archive folders. It's automatically built into every package they make now because they include that in a class. So that's some of the flexibility that now is available to you. It eliminates a lot of the need for user manipulation of files or user movement. And of course, every time you add a user to a process, you increase the chance of error. And this is where our Visual Studio comes in. Microsoft started offering a business integration plugin with Visual Studio 2008. When 2008 first came out, DTS was still the main player at that time. But during the course of it, they offered the plugin. It's a free plugin. You can download it. It plugs into Premium and Professional. It does come pre-installed with Ultimate, and has with every version since then. Integration packages are now compiled into special types of applications. It still has what looks like a DTS extension, but nowadays it's actually a DTS-X. It does require SQL Server with integration services installed in order to run it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to either go to or come from SQL Server. That's just basically the monitoring system that runs it. If you want to go flat file to flat file, you can. You just still need to have SQL Server running in order to execute the package. Okay. What you need to get started is Visual Studio Professional, Premium, or Ultimate. Test does not, from last I saw, Test does not allow the business integration package to be installed, nor do the Express versions. Right. 2014, when I last checked, it was in CTP. They do not have a specific BI plugin yet, but I understand it is coming. And the plugin is specific to the version of Visual Studio that you are running. So if you're running both 2012 and 2013, you do need to download both plugins and run them each independently. All right, it is free. Just go out to MSDN, do a search for business integration, and it'll give you the link that you need to use to plug it in. SQL Server Enterprise is best for using this on. You can use it with SQL Server Developer in order to build your packages and test against. And that's what I'll actually have on this. All right, learning resources. If you want to get into it, Microsoft Developer Network is by far the best, but it is very difficult to follow at times. If any of you have ever tried to go through any of their tutorials, that you'll know that they are very confusing, and unfortunately, when they lead you down one rabbit hole, they don't tell you how to get back to where you started. So bookmark before you go down that rabbit hole.
Accurate but not helpful.
Right. Other source, Skillport with Books 24/7. They actually have online processes, if any of you have access to that. I know some companies do. Lynda.com actually has SSIS training packages, if any of you have ever used that. I mean, it's a wide variety of things that are available. Oh, iTunes University actually has SSIS instructions, and several colleges online do as well.
Have you looked at the Pluralsight classes on SSIS?
I have not yet, but I know there's a host of others out there. I mean, there's a lot of sources out there. Just be careful about some of them. Make sure that you're up to the most recent version. When I first looked at one of the universities, and I think it was Arizona State University, they were actually 2 versions behind on what they were teaching, which was accurate for that version, but it's not accurate for what most people would be using today. Some of these are paid resources, some of these are free. I mean, a lot of what you get in MSDN, you can actually get for free. You don't have to have a subscription, but there's other information that you can get with the subscription. Same thing, Skillport and Books 24/7, that is subscription-based. So is Lynda. iTunes University, some of them are free, some of them are not. It all depends on what you go for. And again, same with the colleges and universities, Pluralsight, things of that nature. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, our sample is where I'm going to get to now. And I took this strictly from the Microsoft tutorials because it was very plain and simple, and I'm sorry I had too many windows open. I'm going to go straight to what they call Lesson 6. Just going to go through some of the features and capabilities of it. We're going to try to run it. I had some configuration issues because of an update, unfortunately, over the weekend, but we'll see what we can get to run. All this is from their tutorial. It is taking the AdventureWorks database and data warehouse, 2012 data warehouse. It's attempting to load currency files, flat files, which we can actually look at, if I can get there. Is actually attempting to load flat file information to update their database. Simple information. Can everyone see that? So, this package is going through and loading. If you notice, that directory had multiple files. So this was set up to read multiple flat files in one execution. Right? The way that the UI is built, you have your toolbox with all the options. We're going to unpin that. You have your Solution Explorer. All of you have seen that. The main work area that you're working with is the Visual Designer, and at the bottom is the Connection Manager, where you plug in all of your source information. For example, this is the source file. Let's see if it launches. There it is. Okay. It's a simple connection manager. It's very minimal configured. And again, the reason it's minimal is because we're reading in a variable name for a file name and not a specific. If you're programming an application that has the exact same file name coming into your system every time, that would be what's in the file name box right here.
What if you had like a prefix to the file? This integration always has a file prefixed with.
You can plug those in as variables, as part of the variable process. And I'll show you that when we get to the variable configuration. Unfortunately, what I can't show you right now, because there's no file defined, is what the other tabs do. So I'm going to temporarily assign a file to it so you can see what the other information is. It tells you the type of information that, the type of file, if it's text qualified, if it's header row information, all the basic things. And this is a flat file, so all of the information that you would look for to determine how do you define your flat file. Gives you column information. You can actually see what the columns look like so that you can validate your information. Then advanced gives you an ability to customize the information for each column. So for example, the rate is a float. Currency ID is a width of 3 that is a string. Date, end date, all of this information, actually end date rate. Preview then again goes and gives you what the file would look like when it comes in, how it's parsed out, each column, and unfortunately it's not highlighting the column, there it is. Each column of information, how it breaks it out. All right. Again, I don't want to save this because I don't want to overwrite it. The output, in this case, it's going to the SQL Server. Right? And it looks like a standard SQL Server connection string, probably most of you have seen before. Specific database gives you all the different information that you would need. Right? Most of this is configurable. Then we have the workflow in this case. This is a very simple one. It is just going to go through and read each file, take the file, check to make sure that the information is valid, put it into the database if it is, log it if it is not. There is a lookup involved with it. But because, again, there is multiple files in the folder, you have for each file in the folder, going back to the toolbox, it's not showing up. All right, the toolbox, this would be one of the options in the toolbox. And I found the best way to find out in the toolbox which one you want, usually go by the icon, because they're a little bit easier to determine.
Was it in the SSIS toolbox?
Yes.
Oh, it was happening.
I'm sorry? Oh,
Doesn't matter, sorry.
okay.
Another toolbox.
I might have been on the wrong one. Oh yeah, you're right. I was in the wrong one. All right, the for each loop This, this is all configurable. Tells you where the connection is. This is where you ask Dan, can you put in a prefix? And so here's my wildcard for the
regular expression.
Yep. Yep, it's currency underscore, and in this case, the files all had 3-character country codes, .txt. Your source folder, but this is also a variable that you have to set up. You can keep setting it here, but if you don't set it up in the variable or change the variable, it will go back to the variable value. So it will work in test, but not work in deployment. And unfortunately, this is the one aspect of this package I do not like, and that is this window is not large enough to show everything. So this is the variable definition, which is the folder name. And I'll get to the variables in a second here. Mappings, again, file name. One of the things that is not very well documented in SSIS instructions and tutorials that I have found out is if you have a variable file name, use the index of 0. It never tells you why, but that's what you have to do to work. It's one of those little things you have to learn by trial and error. We don't have any expressions in this package as far as this loop is concerned. So for every file that is going through and reading, it is executing this extract simple currency data. If you notice, we're on the control flow tab of the designer. The extract sample currency data is actually part of the data flow. This looks like a standard workflow diagram, and it really is, where it's just going through and it's telling you what's happening for each loop. Currency.
As you're setting these things up, then it's really a drag and drop.
Initially drag and drop and then configure.
Okay.
Yep. It's when you get into the advanced functions that you start getting into the back-end C#. And some of the toolbox items are putting in execution modules, putting in file functions. I mean, there's a DOS command process or file watch command process in there where you can actually do command line entries in your flow.
Okay.
This looks more like a polling process because you're living through all the files. So would you do the polling inside of SSIS or outside, like through scheduling?
This is actually not really polling whether the files exist. This is something that would be executed on a schedule, and it's assuming the files are there. Mm-hmm. Polling you could trigger through an outside application, some sort of monitor that determines when the file is dropped in. For example, the current project that I was on before I went to where I'm at, when the file is dropped, some sort of file watching service would say, hey, this file now exists, and kick off the SSIS package, which would cause the actual load.
Okay.
Right? It can be done the other way. I mean, that's what's part of the flexibility and part of part of the benefits of this is it doesn't limit you to one way of doing things. And what you'll find out is people that come through people that have been working with Microsoft integration for more than 10 years still look at it from a standpoint of this is DTS. And people that have come into it in the last 5 or 6 years are looking at it, hey, this is a type of programming I can do. Mm-hmm. And so it all depends on what your background is, which way you find workable and easy for you. But all the options are there. It's some of the things we found out as a company. There's more than one way to do this.
What's your preferred way? So, for example, when we're running it on a schedule for us, we're using Jenkins.
Mm-hmm.
We're going saying, okay, check this every 5 hours, whatever.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What do you guys do? What's your...
I've seen it done that way, just run it at a specific time cycle. The assignment that I was on for 2 years before the last couple, they actually have a service running on the file server that does the receiving. That this service, when it recognizes a change in the directory, it goes out and tells SSIS server that, hey, I have a new file, it's this name, kick off this package.
But again, something external to SSIS, you generally don't
Right.
build that into your package.
You can, we had that option, Just this company chose to do it a different way because they had come up from the DTS environment, and rather than take out what already worked and go to a different route, plus every time they move files, it's not just SSIS that gets triggered. It could be an Oracle process. It could be a mainframe process. So by using the file watcher that they built, they can actually determine which way it goes. It's a configure file that they use to determine what server gets told to do what. And that way you don't have to maintain 3 different systems, they only have to maintain 1. But if you're strictly working off of SSIS as your main integration tool, no matter what, then you can have it built into the SSIS packages themselves.
Do you recommend moving it to a working folder so you don't get multiple threads processing it? Or?
It's always a good idea to move things to a working folder, especially as they're being, two-step process. Move it from the drop folder to a working folder. When completed, from a working folder to an archive folder. Right? It's always a good idea if the files don't have some sort of identifier unique to the specific run, include that as part of your process when you move. The piece to move a file to an archive folder, you can change the name of that file along the way. And I've seen people actually put the date and timestamp in of when they did it. When we get back to the source again, we saw the text file. This defines what each of those are in the text file. It gives them a name, tells which ones we're using, what to do in a case of an error. Let's see, you had mentioned the output, and I don't see the in here. Okay, so we'll get to that. Actually, I'm going to do it real quick. We talked about the file. Wait a minute. Wrong section. We talked about the ability to move or change file names, and this is actually a file system task that can be done. Oh, there it is. It can be set up in several different ways, and basically the operation, you have a drop-down box that you can use. You have a destination source, whether you want to overwrite if it already exists. Different parameters and expressions you can rename in the process by taking the different property of the file. You can even once you've read it, mark it as locked, so it can't be deleted. I mean, whatever properties you can access through a command line, you have access to here.
And to go back,
Mm-hmm.
say later on in the next class. So you said we could make a class. So you take the file system, you have create new folders, new files,
Mm-hmm.
rename, whatever, things like that. You put them in a class. So can you create like a library
Mm-hmm.
project
Yep.
in SSIS?
Mm-hmm.
That can be used by anything? Is it important?
Yeah, you would attach it into your solution as part of your solution. You can have a project of just libraries, and then you would add it to the solution and put a dependency upon your integration project to the library, to the class library project. And that way everything is accessible. And again, that adds to some of the flexibility that previously we haven't had. All right. Again, some of the tasks that you can perform, before I go back into the flow, we have all these common tasks, bulk insert, expression tasks, FTP, file system. There's pretty much anything you can do from command line or web-based, you can do now in SSIS. Going back to the data flow, I said this involves a lookup. So we've read our file in. By the way, these arrows are actually mapping arrows. If If I can get my cursor to stop, and it doesn't want to, there it goes. Or you're mapping the data, the types, and you have some control over even the mapping process. Gives you a chance to view what they are. Right, we're passing in the information. We want it to do a lookup, so we have a connection. We actually have a SQL statement in here to do that lookup. And it gives you a lot of the same tools you found in other Microsoft products, where you can build the query, you can parse the query, you can do a drag and drop in a query builder, and it'll generate the SQL for you. Or if you know what it is and you want to do it yourself, you can just cut and paste it in here. It gives you flexibility and options. And once you've done it, just to make sure that you have it, you can even preview it, just like all the other Microsoft tools. Right? It tells you what connection or what columns are using the connections. And again, a lot of these are just drag and drop for this first part of it. Then you go back and configure. It gives you capabilities if you want to go beyond what the basic drag and drop functions are. It gives you capabilities to go deeper in. Again, everything gives you an option. One of the nice things about the SSIS now, as opposed to DTS, everything gives you an option on what to do with an error and how to branch and record errors. Instead of just having it blow up on you and then you have to go back and look through each line of data in each field and figure out why did this not like it, you can now log all of that information and continue. You have the option of continuing. Right? Again, if the lookup is successful, you have one branch. You always have an error if the lookup was not successful. Simple error description processing here, and there we go. It's just going through, and you define how you want to record the errors when you're done. Mentioned going into C#. We have this little edit script button. Thought I had already done this, I'm sorry. But this is what gets you into the development window, the coding window. So this is where you can put custom code into process. If you're using libraries but you want to override them, override a process, this is where you would do it. So, I do apologize, I thought this was already built. It's not. There it goes. I think it's not going to. So, any questions while we wait for this to come back?
What about the migration of all DTS into SSIS? Possible?
Yes, it is possible. There is basically an upgrade wizard built into every version of Visual Studio that has the business integration module plugin. There is an upgrade wizard available in all. And it will do just a basic simple mapping at that point. File in, file out, mapping through. But it gives you the capability to go in then at that point and customize how you want to do it. I mean, if you've originally had it set up so that you had one DTS package for each individual file in a folder, and you want to go through a for each file in folder loop, you can do it, convert one, and drop that into a for each file loop. And go back and configure it that way. So yes, the upgrades are there.
Is there any, what do you do for kind of like automated testing? Is there anything along those lines, like, where you kind of have to just make your own process to wrap it and bring it back?
There is nothing specific that I've seen built in. I have not looked too much in detail in 2013. I did not see anything in 2012 or 10. That is the one area that I do see SSIS lacking, and that's in their testing and debugging. Biggest thing, same thing as in SQL Server. When you're trying to debug a SQL script in SQL Server, it doesn't go to each field. It gives you the whole statement. So if you're in the middle of a transactional sequence and you have a begin and end block that has an error in it, it tells you the block is an error, not which line within the block or which field within the block. So you kind of have to do a lot of manual processing at that point in time. That is one drawback I do see of SSIS. I'm hoping they improve it in 2014.
And do you guys do anything for, like, do you just store your packages in source control? That's what we're doing, but you don't really get comparison against that?
Different, source control is yes, in every place I've been that uses SSIS, yes, we use it in a source control environment. You're right, comparisons are difficult because it doesn't always recognize simple changes. So far, we haven't had as much of a problem on any site that I've worked on, though. So.
You got the XML files, it's hard to tell what changed.
Mm-hmm.
And then going over, it seems like every time I save a project, it says, oh, there's some change that I need to
Right.
log. And I
Right.
don't know if there are any tools that have made it better for that.
Not that I've seen, and again, there are a couple drawbacks with using Microsoft capability. They made the development easy. They've not worked as much on the maintenance of it. So.
Do you recommend SSIS for every integration? Because we've done a lot of custom integrations just in C#.
Right. No, I don't. It can be done in any integration, but I don't recommend it for every integration.
When would you use it?
Specifically, I would use it on large data tasks. Again, because it can be configured directly into the SQL server. I would use it when you have, even though it's customized, I would have some sort of rigid structure in the process of integration. If it's going to be a repeated object from like a business to business, you're always going to be getting your purchase orders in every day. That's one case I'd recommend it, as long as everything is handled in just loading the data. If you need to touch outside systems other than your database, I don't always recommend it. I might recommend it as a back-end process once you've done the other processes, and then add SSIS as the final load into the database. But again, each project needs to be looked at and determined what is the best method. And don't just assume that always the same process works across the board. I mean, we have all these languages and capabilities available to us. That doesn't mean we should stick with one and just use it. We should use the best one for the solution. So. Anything else while we go on? The code window finally did pop up. As you see, it's just a simple C# in this case. Most of this was pre-generated, but you have the ability to go in and edit some things on your own, add classes.
Can you go back to the different tasks that you can use?
This one? Oh, the
Tasks.
this one here.
Right.
Okay.
The execute process task. What can you? I think you need to go on.
Oh, wait a minute. Execute process. Where was it? Right there.
What kind of process?
Bet you that's an external exe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes.
Yep.
Different languages and technology.
Any compiled program that you want to put into your process. So if you have something that's built already outside, but you now want to incorporate it into your load, you can always execute it on the file at this point in time before you go on with your insertion into your database. Let's see, get rid of that. The part of the aspect that I like most about SSIS that I really didn't appreciate or didn't have a full, I didn't really like, was lacking in DTS, is this error processing. And right now, this package actually sets it out to a flat file. But just error processing in general, you now have the capability of checking the quality of the data during the process and handling exceptions on a row-by-row basis. I still see a lot of companies that have graduated from the DTS that they look at the process, if one fails, it all fails. And that might not always suit the business need. It was done just for simplicity because someone, when they developed the process, didn't know how to go back and select just the ones that failed. Well, part of this logging, if you're building to a text file and you have something failed because it failed a lookup, if you regenerate that file and drop it back into your workflow and make the corrections to your table, you just have to reprocess the ones that failed in the first place. You don't have to go back and reprocess the whole data. You don't, or a whole data flow. You don't have to worry about backing out something that already inserted. Right. One thing I mentioned about the ability to move files. This package, there's one big thing missing here that I would make sure would be included. We're going through a for each file process. So we're looking at the file, going through, doing a lookup. If it's valid, we're inserting it and writing it to the database. If it's not, we're getting an error description and writing it to a flat file. And then we're going on to the next file. If the package fails and restarts, halfway through, after 10 out of 20 files, what happens to those first 10 files? Pardon me? Everything gets repeated. So the one thing missing here would be a file move. Get it out of that input directory.
Now, can you put like a transaction on the thing? Say if you make changes to your database, is there any way to wrap it in a transaction?
There are various functions that you can use that can add it into a transaction, yes. If you want to do, instead of the simple output, you want to actually put that into like a stored procedure that's wrapped in a transaction. That would be one way to do it. And for example, you have a script component which could be a C#. You have, there should be in here, yes, you can actually drop in, and if you have your stored procedure, I don't want to do that right now. If you have your stored procedure, that's one of the configuration properties. You execute the stored procedure and you drop in what your parameters are. So this would take the place of that.
What if you wanted your transaction to like wrap multiple stored procedures and multiple functions?
Very easy. Just the best way I found to do that though is have the stored procedure that creates the multiple rights that do make sure that they are all in the database that you're calling the destination database. So if you have a looped stored procedure that calls 3 different sub-stored procedures, just make sure they're all in the same database, especially if you're doing transaction processing. Some versions and some installs of SQL Server will not maintain the transaction across multiple databases. See, that's what I've run into in the past. I haven't really gotten into why, but I do know that I've seen that. Any other questions? Had our first escapee. Yep, I'm pretty much wrapped up here for right now. Again, this is just basics because this is, I mean, I can go into every one of these functions. I mean, some of the things that I've seen commonly used are merges. I always put a row count in my packages because I always like basically header and footer information. I want to know how many records I inserted, and I'm logging that into an insert table.
That OLEDB command, is
Mm-hmm.
that executing, that seems new, because I remember trying to find something in a data flow. You could do it outside of the
Right.
control flow. But is that new?
Mm-hmm. It came in actually in 2012.
Now, can you run SQL commands against your data before it gets in the database too?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Have you used it with electronic medical records where security is concerned?
You have to pay attention to the process. It's not just medical records that security is a concern. Pretty much anything with HR now. You have to be concerned because most HR data is encrypted. So you need to make sure that the database commands and processes are well defined and well written before you plug those or use those into your processes. Strict encryption here, 2012 was not very clean. It did have it, but we didn't use it. We had to use external processes. I have not really looked at it from 2013. I don't know if it got better or not. I have not been on an HR project since starting using 13.
And one more kind of, I guess, more technical question.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, taking out sensitive information or information that can change between dev and QA or production, we put in config files.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, but my problem is what about individual changes between developer machines? Like, kind of, how do you handle that? Like, these are just like naming config files.
Right. That's always a challenge in any development environment, not just this. And there's a lot of different ways you can do it. One of the things we use in-house is we set up virtual machines that are all pretty much defined the same until we get in there and start making changes ourselves.
But then it's their fault.
Right, that is the individual person's fault. But at least it gives us a base to work with. And that's one of the things that I found is probably the easiest to work with, is setting up a virtual machine.
I bet you lose a day or more per developer if you don't have a virtual machine for the project, just on getting the environment set up.
Yeah, unless it takes you 6 weeks to get a virtual machine.
Well, you can set up your local. I mean, set it up locally and just get the first one going, copy that file, that virtual file, and just copy and put it in and connect to it on the driver.
I like that. Anyway, I gotta head out.
Thanks for coming.
Any other questions while they head out? Guess that's it for now then. So, I'll close that one. I did compile, I'm going to close this down. I did compile this. It didn't want to run the last time, but I'll give it one more shot here just to see. It does compile, it just doesn't want to run. I want to deploy it.
Thanks so much for the presentation. It was really good.
Oh, you're welcome.
I'll look forward to it.
Yep, we'll get the link will be available on the meetup notes. Or
I'll see you guys. Thank you so much.
Yep,
Good seeing you. Yeah, thank you too, Chris.
no problem. Let's see if it wants to run. Nope. It keeps telling me the versions aren't compatible. Versioning control within the project.
Okay.
And I'm not sure why it got out of sync, and I can't figure out where to put it back in sync.
Is the project a zipped up XML
Yes.
file?
Mm-hmm. It's a zipped up. The project is actually, yes, a zipped up file. Let's see. Oh, I had that link in there. Okay.
So I wonder if you were to unzip the project and then put that in source control, if you could see more of the changes.
Well, no, the project itself, when you're building it, is stored as a straight XML and a pseudo XML.
Okay,
But when you're actually deploying it, it becomes zipped.
I see.
Right, so you can actually look at the project directly. Let's see, where is documents? Are you still recording?
Yeah.
Okay. Where did I put it? Modular. That's not it. It is actually simple. Come on. There we go.
Tablet settings.
I'm sorry?
It's the tablet settings, the things you want to change stuff.
Right. Okay, let's see. How do I... There we go. Open with. Where's my... I don't have... Oops. I don't have Notepad++, but I do have that. I mean, it's kind of a pseudo XML is the package. So, and it's actually this setting right there, which is keeping it from executing, and I can't get it to change back to the correct setting.
It's supposed to be.
Pardon me?
What is it supposed to be? 5?
No, it's supposed to be, well, it's saying it's 4 here, but in the deployment it says it's 5. So when I rebuild, the next time it'll say that it's 5, but the solution is looking for 6. And so it's always under it by 1, and I can't figure out what happened to change that.
Change it with Notepad here.
Pardon me?
What if you just change that number?
I've tried it. Right, it doesn't. it says no. So, package format version 8.
Have you tried running the package from, you could execute the package, right? You
From-
click on it.
From the,
There's the UI, not from the Visual Studio,
I was trying to run it from the,
from, yeah.
from here,
System.
and that's the error. That's SQL Server, it aborted. I'm trying to execute it directly. And there's nothing really to go and do. Those are just the data files. But when it blows up, it says, nope.
You could run it from the file system too, right? There's a UI to do that. I don't know if you installed it, nothing yet.
Yeah, I don't have that, but it still runs it against SQL Server, and SQL Server is saying that there's a problem. I have not tried from here. Come on. There we go.
Okay. Rather look at the errors.
Where's the error?
Execution results. Look at the execution results. And
Which is, I'm sorry,
The top right.
Top little blue, the little
the
green arrow.
green thing.
I'm,
The green circle with the arrow in it.
Down.
oh, right there.
Yeah.
Got it, yep, okay.
And give you some errors. Couldn't find the data file.
Ah, it was supposed to generate that, so this is a different error.
Okay.
That one's supposed to be created if it can't find it, so that's configured wrong. Okay.
So it looked like from the environment it did run.
Yep, and it ran here. Yep. Those are just all for continuations. Oh, I didn't get into the parameters, but let's see. I'm already stopped. That, what it's saying is actually one of these parameters. But I don't see it. Looking for the error file. I do not see it. test here. Wants to be called. Don't need to do that. Is it actually doing something? Oh, yep, it is. Oh, it didn't like the output.
Yeah, that'd probably be what you concern with,
Yep. Okay, so why is lesson 3 failing?
You could open that log file.
Might be security.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, well, I'll
Yeah.
get on that. Before we put it out there, I'll make sure this is all configured correctly and then zip it back up.
Yeah, cool.
So.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Chris.
No problem. And, hey, I scared him off.